later on, they can have the recording. Okay. So, infectious diseases, we're talking about infectious diseases, okay? And we know, in fact, there's some infectious diseases, they're contagious diseases. Do you have any idea? Can you recall, obviously, what they are, but anyone who can define them, or what do you think they are, and why are they so important? Why do we need to know them? Anyone? No? Okay. So, we've just been through COVID-19. Okay. So, and we're still, it's always in the news that there's a very highly virulent organism that's going to strike humankind, and it's going to be even more powerful than COVID-19. We keep hearing these things. And apart from that, whatever happened during COVID-19 was not pleasant at all. So, the reason why we study infectious diseases is to know how they happen. And why do we want to know how they happen, where they happen? Just because we want to stop them from happening. So if we know what causes them, we would know how to break the chain of transmission. So there's some words that I've used here, virulent or virulent. So a virulence or virulence is the killing power of a disease. So how powerful is a disease to kill you? The higher the virulence, the higher the power for an organism to cause disease in you, to cause um, death in you, um, obviously. So, and it is all in your, like, it's not in your hands completely. So that is why we have vaccines. But then we have some immunity that is innate, that comes from our mothers, but that remains for a very less time. Okay, so we have that for around 6 months, and then most of the children, they start um, eating solids, or semi-solids, I would say, and they go off breast milk for some time. Obviously, you can continue it, but then you're introducing more substances to it also. It's not only breast milk. Obviously, this is for supporting life. It has to be substituted, uh, and in 6 months, and then that is when your immunity starts, the infant's immunity. So an infant is a child who is less than 1 years old. So in 6 months time, this infant starts gaining other organisms, because at first it was just protection from all harmful pathogens because mother's milk was there, but then they start getting exposure to several other organisms, not intentionally, but that's how it is. So that is when you know.
Sorry,
Yeah,
would you share the screen, please, if it's
yeah, yeah.
possible?
Yeah, I'm not,
Is it
no, no,
possible?
I haven't started the lecture
Okay,
as yet. Yeah, I'm just talking about,
sorry.
that's okay. Yeah, thank you for letting me know. But yeah, it's not on the screen because this is something that I'm just sharing with you. So yeah, so infectious diseases, they're important because we need to know how epidemics happen. This is, like, an infectious diseases has is happened, and now it's becoming widespread, and it becomes an epidemic where it's not being controlled. It's not remaining within the area that it originated from. And when we have a pandemic, that means we have it full blown. It is all over the globe, and it's crossed borders. So having said that, that this is why it is important. What I will do is that I will share my screen where I have um, the objectives, the learning objectives of the session. So particularly, we will have 4 sessions. Um, Ideally, we'll have 4 sessions, but these 4 sessions might not be covered in just 4 weekends or 4 days. So we might have more discussions on our sessions, and then maybe a day or two might be increased or decreased depending upon um, how we go about it. So, because my objective is to make you understand the whole process instead of just going through the thing. So that is what I would want to do. So this is the assignment brief. Before that, I will go to the learning outcomes. So obviously, at the end of a unit, you will have an assignment, and the assignment is a lot about whatever we've talked about in these sessions. It's not going to be anything outside it, but sometimes we would want you to research more, and to find out more information and document that information. So, your learning outcomes are here. So, in this particular scenario, let me just start annotating, and I'll just take just a minute. Sorry. I actually, when you're there, I need your attendance also. So, I'm just taking a snapshot of whoever's attended. Um, okay. So everyone can see my screen, I hope. Okay. So, so your objective is here to be able to understand the structure and biological diversity of organisms that cause infectious diseases. Okay. So here you would want to know how to define the term pathogen, what is a pathogen, and classify or divide different types of pathogens that cause infectious diseases. And your second learning assessment criteria. So related to this, what else would you want to know? You would want to explain how the structure of an organism enables it to function as a pathogen. Okay, so here we are talking about organisms that cause pathology or disease. Okay. And the second part is to understand vector-borne disease transmission. What is a vector? We'll talk about that, but a vector is an organism that transmits a disease. So, if, for instance, if there's a bacteria and it's waterborne, so what is the water? It's a vector that takes or transmits the water, transmits the bacteria from one place to another. Their food flies, for instance, or flies and house flies. They also act as vectors where they transmit disease from one place to another. And you would want to explain how different vectors are able to transmit diseases in human beings. We'll talk all about this. Okay. And then we would want you to understand how the body provides the first line of defense against infectious disease transmission and the benefits of vaccination. So, as I said, we have our own um, protective mechanisms, but then some things that are out of our reach, we need vaccinations for that. Here, we would want to evaluate the body's different non-specific diseases against infection and explain how vaccinations or vaccines can lead to an artificially acquired immunity against certain infectious diseases. So the immunity that we gain is artificial, okay? And some immunity, sometimes some vaccines give lifelong immunity, and sometimes it happens that you have to have another dose of a vaccine. So it depends upon what's the mechanism of action of the vaccine. The fourth learning outcome is to understand the specific immune system. So here you would distinguish between passive and active forms of acquired immunity. So there's immunity that you acquire. Okay, so that immunity again is not innate. There's an innate immunity which develops which is already in you. We're all humans. We fall sick. So whenever you fall sick, that immunity within your body falls down, and that is when you fall prey to or other organisms and you develop diseases. Okay, so this is actually a active. sorry, acquired immunity is immunity acquired through vaccines. It's not your own immunity. Then within this, so to understand the specific immune system within this, you would want to describe the major components of the immune system and their roles in the humoral and the cell mediated response. And the third part of this learning outcome is to explain the difference between a primary and a secondary immune response. Okay. The fifth, last learning outcome, I think, yeah, it's the fifth one. Yes. So this is to understand how infectious diseases can be controlled medically. So when you know all of this, when you uh, are aware of all of this, what we've discussed already, when you've researched it well and you've studied it well, now we would want you to understand how infectious diseases can be controlled medically and how pathogenic disease, drug resistance can arise. Okay, what is drug resistance? We'll talk about this, but there's certain organisms that develop resistance against certain drugs. So we have to have several drugs to fight against them. A very good example of this is tuberculosis. Okay, but other infectious diseases are also there that develop immunity against certain organisms. Here you would want to evaluate the use of antibiotics, antivirals, antifungal drugs as methods of treatment for pathogenic organisms or pathogenic infection. Um, I'm not going into detail of what the assessment will be about, but it is more or less the same. So I'm stopping share. Finished all the learning outcomes, the 5 learning outcomes. So you have ideally, so you have 5 learning outcomes. That means we have 5 week, 5 days to cover these sessions. Any questions on these learning outcomes? Is everyone with me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just a year would also be fine. Yeah. Uh, okay. So now coming to our first learning outcome. Any question in between? Again, I would just request you to um, just share it in in the chat box. If you have any questions or you have any comments, I'm happy to take them. Uh, okay, so learning outcome 1, and start sharing my screen with you. Okay, some terminologies are would be quite new for you. You might not have heard about them, but that's okay. The things that are new for me also, and the only best way is to ask if you're not sure about what it's talking about or what the tutor is talking about. Otherwise, if you don't have a chance, because obviously we tutors are also, we know stuff, but we can't know everything. Okay, so always use resources that are authentic. So we give you resources at the end of every session that you can utilize to find out more about your questions if you have any. So, the first learning outcome we are starting here is to understand the structure and biological diversity of organisms that cause infectious diseases. Okay, so this is your indicative content where you would want to know the types of organisms that can cause disease. So, the different types of organisms, the ones that we as humans know and that have been researched for so many years are bacteria, they are fungi or fungus, protozoa, and then there are macroparasites as well. Okay, so bacteria, they have different structure and different infectivity associated with them. So you've got Mycobacterium tuberculosis, you have Salmonella, you have Staphylococcus, you have um, normal body flora. So what's normal body flora? Um, does anyone know what's normal body flora? So our body, for instance, our gut, our stomach, or the system within where our food goes in and passes through different phases. Uh, this the body itself, for instance, our skin, um, they have certain organisms or certain bacteria that are not harmful. They're actually useful for our bodies. Okay, so they're normal body flora. So they protect our body from invading organisms such as viruses, or certain bacteria that are harmful. So, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, for instance, is not a normal body flora. It doesn't live in our bodies. Okay, it's something that's acquired from outside. It's a disease that we acquire from this organism, and it comes from outside. But then our body has certain um, a mechanism where it protects uh, the whole system within us against these organisms. But whenever there's stress on our body, what do I mean by stress? Any physical stress. So we might fall ill, or very, we might be working very, very hard at times, and so you might notice that when you're working very hard, um, you then tend to fall. Like if there was a graph that monitored how hard you work on one day, the next day you will always see a dip in your activity. That means that your body can't tolerate more. So it's either deplete of the energy, or it needs time to gain more energy. So that's the time. Or any mental stress. So that like say you've been extremely distressed about something that's happened, because of which your immunity decreases, and because of that you might see many people who have mental health problems. Unfortunately, they have other diseases as well. These are called comorbidities. So this happens because your body, it it loses its normal protective mechanism. And this normal body flora, it can be disturbed because of certain drugs as well. So you might take an antibiotic that might disrupt your normal body flora, the organisms that live within your body, and because of which you might be prone to develop other diseases because of other organisms, now that it's your body's left open. They're viruses. They have a structure, different sizes. They have a life cycle. For instance, there's influenza, measles, mumps, rubella, HIV, AIDS. You have fungi. There's different structure, reproductive mechanism, infectivity. For instance, you have athlete's foot, which is very common here. You have candida. And then you have protozoa who have different structure, life cycle control measures. Um, Such as Plasmodium, Schistosomiasis. There's certain organisms that you would not even know that happen over here. And then there are certain organisms that might happen more in developing countries or underdeveloped countries. Okay. And those underdeveloped countries might not have the organisms that live over here. So, for instance, Mycobacterium tuberculosis is not a disease that is prevalent over here, but if it comes from abroad somewhere, it's then imported. It's an imported disease, and then it can happen that this might become so out of control that it might become an epidemic. You never know, god forbid. And then we have macroparasites, such as those which can be seen. Okay, that is why they are known as macroparasites. They are parasites that live on other organisms. So parasites have to live on other organisms to survive, such as lice. You have scabies, you have tapeworms, you have ticks. There are many other examples. These are just some of the examples. So, okay, sorry. Yeah. Any questions, please let me know again. If I'm going too fast, please let me know. You're not medics, but I have to be at your level. That is what I'm trying, my utmost effort is. Um, yeah, I can happily go very slow. I can go faster than this. It's all up to you. However you feel best and most comfortable. So, what are microorganisms? Microorganisms, obviously, they are organisms that are not macro, as the name suggests. They are very small. They cannot be seen through the naked eye. They are the examples we've talked about, them before. They are bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, and parasites. Okay. And there's certain terminologies that you might want to know, you would have to know, because you will this is a part of your uh, you of your assignment. So what is an infection? An infection occurs when either viruses, bacteria, or other microbes enter your body and begin to multiply. So what the I would say the beauty of these organisms is that they multiply. They don't remain static. So if there's one virus that enters your body, it won't remain one. It's going to multiply several times. And the more they multiply, the more powerful the infection is. That we all agree with? Yes. Same is the case with bacteria and other microbes. Okay. And what is a disease? So an infection, sometimes you say he's suffering from a disease or he's suffering from an infection. Are they the same or are they different? So a disease happens in a small proportion of infected people. It occurs when the cells in our body are damaged as a result of infection and signs and symptoms of an illness appear. Okay, so what are signs and what are symptoms? So signs are something that the physician sees, or when you as a healthcare provider see. You might see, um, and a symptom is something that the patient feels themselves. Okay, so a patient might feel fever and you might document their temperature, and that's a sign. Or you might see, so let's say the a patient might feel very lethargic, maybe breathless. And what sign do you see? You would not, breathlessness is not a sign, that's, sorry, a symptom. So the symptom will be what the patient feels. So that's breathlessness, as I said. And the sign that you will see is anemia. So there will be pallor. The patient will be very pale to look at. Okay. And for instance, the patient may be dehydrated. And again, the sign will be signs of dehydration, where you see sunken eyes, you see the mucosa of the tongue. For instance, if you check the tongue of the patient, it will be very dry. It won't be moist like it should be. And what is the symptom? The patient might feel lethargic again, might not be able to breathe properly. Okay. So this is a disease. So this is in terms of infectious diseases, this is the case when cells obviously in our body are damaged. But then apart from infection, you have certain other diseases that are not infectious, such as diabetes, such as hypertension, such as cancer. Okay. So there is a disease happening, but it's not an infectious disease. How does an infection spread? There are several ways it can spread. So your what transmission can be through the air, through the water. It can be direct from one person to another without the need of the air or water in between, or it can be through ingestion of, let's say, food. And what are prevention measures? Your personal protective equipment, which you all know what they are. You have vaccinations and you have hygiene. Okay. So personal protection obviously means that there is a distance between you and the person who is infectious. That happens because you've worn your gloves, you've worn your mask. The person is protected from you and you are protected from the person. So this is what distance means also in prevention. So what are infectious diseases? They're disorders that are caused by organisms. These include bacteria, viruses, fungi, or parasites. There are many organisms that live in and on our bodies. As I said, there are certain organisms that are harmless and they're even helpful. So, even in the vagina, for instance, the female vagina, you have organisms that are there to protect against certain organisms. But then there are certain conditions, some organisms may cause disease. Some infectious diseases can be passed from person to person. Okay, so otherwise you're all protected. Now, when you're not protected, that happens because you lose your immunity. For instance, there's a person having cancer. They have a low immune system. Okay, and they're on drugs that might make them prone to more infections. Their immunity is reduced, so that is why they're more prone to develop infections, and the protective mechanisms within their body are not working optimally as they should be. A pregnant woman, for a woman, for instance, she loses her immunity, and she um is obviously she and her newborn child may be prone to develop infections as well. uh, and then infectious diseases, they commonly spread through the direct transfer, so it's one person to another. When this happens, there's either a virus is transmitted. You could have it through touch, you could have it through kissing, you could have it through coughing or sneezing, or on someone who is not infected. So there are certain infectious diseases such as Campylobacter infection. You have hepatitis A, B, C, D, and E. You have coronavirus 19, COVID-19, and you have influenza, which causes flu. You have measles. You have meningococcal disease. You have cholera. You have typhoid. You have hepatitis. We've talked about that. You have tuberculosis, you have HIV. Um, so HIV is the infection, and once you have the infection, you might develop the disease, which is known as acquired immunodeficiency disease, which is AIDS. Okay, so there's a difference between HIV and AIDS. Any idea what's the difference between an infectious disease and a contagious disease? Anyone there? I'm stopping sharing. I'm muting myself to for you to answer this question. What is the difference between, or is there a difference between a contagious disease and an infectious disease? If there is, what is it? Anyone?
Hello.
Yeah. You want
Yeah,
to speak?
I,
Hmm.
yeah, I just want to say something. Infection disease are like we mentioned coronavirus, um, uh, vamos see, uh, coronavirus are infection disease like flus,
Hmm.
and, and so on and so on. Like flus, cough, like someone is coughing.
Hmm.
Uh, and the other is like
Yeah. So, what do you think a contagious disease might do?
it's like AIDS, like you mentioned, AIDS, HIV,
Yes.
yeah, cancer,
Hmm.
um, so on. Yeah, so just mentioned too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Vida. So you at least tried. Anyone else wants to give it a go? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so as you said, there are certain diseases like COVID-19, that's an infection. And then there are certain diseases like that are contagious. Now, what makes a disease contagious? Okay, so an infectious disease may or may not be contagious. Okay, so a contagious disease, the meaning, it looks like that it's a contagious disease, so that means it's got the capability of infecting more people around them. Okay, so it's not just one person that has the infection, it's going to be contagious. That means it's going to be spreading. Okay, so an infectious disease, they're caused by microorganism or microscopic germs such as bacteria or viruses, and these get into our bodies and cause problems. Okay, cause problems like cause illnesses. Some, but not all infectious diseases, they spread directly from one person to another. So the infectious diseases that spread from one person to another, they are known as contagious diseases. Okay, so there are some infections that spread from to people from an animal or insect, but they are not contagious from other humans. So there's Lyme disease. You can't catch it if from someone you're hanging out with or pass it in the street. It comes from the bite of an infected tick only. Okay, so there's like for instance, if you have a disease, it's okay, rabies, for instance. Rabies spreads from dog bite. Okay, now it's not contagious because if there's someone who's had a dog bite and has had protective measures later on, or even has not had those protective measures, you are not vulnerable. Okay, they won't spread the infection to you unless they bite you, obviously, but that doesn't happen. That's very rare. But it only spreads from the dog to human. So it's an infection that the dog transmits, the rabies virus, but it's not contagious because it doesn't spread. It doesn't spread from one person to another. So what are contagious diseases? They are flu, they're colds or streptococcus throat infections. They spread from person to person in several ways. So one way is through direct physical contact. So you might touch the person, you might kiss the person who has an infection. There's so many children that have a contagious flu, for instance. The teacher might not hug them or kiss them, obviously, but then that child might sneeze. And that then infectious microbe goes in the air. And wherever there's a person close, for instance, if there's a teacher, they might develop that infection, catch that infection. Sometimes people get contagious diseases by touching or using something um, uh, that has an infected, like an infected person um, has touched that same thing. So, for instance, you're using a straw with someone who has mono or stepping into the shower after some time and has athlete's foot is so common because there's one person who has the infection and you've not got it because you've touched that person, you've not got it because you've hugged that person or been in close contact, but it is because they've used that area and you have used it as well. So that fungus has caused the same infection in you as well. There's sexually transmitted diseases or infections that spread through all types of sex. So there's oral sex, there's anal sex, and there's vaginal sex. Okay, so these are also spread. They are contagious diseases, but they are not spread. Um, they're not spread by eating something, or they're not spread by using an object that has been infected. They're actually transmitted through the mouth, or through the anus, or through the vaginal route. Okay, so these are sexually transmitted infections or diseases. So an infection is something that you might have the disease that has or you might not have the disease as yet. You just have the infection. So the disease has to have full signs and symptoms that we talked about earlier. So now we define the term pathogen and we classify different types of pathogens that can cause infectious diseases. As you can recall, this is one of your learning outcomes. Okay. So if you go back and have a look at the recordings, you can then relate. And then if you just um, go through it again, it will be reinforced and you'll have a better idea of what to do in your assignment. Okay, so there are a number of different organisms that can cause disease in human beings. These organisms can be classified as bacteria. So we've classified them before as well. Bacteria, you have salmonella, sorry, you have E. coli, Escherichia coli, you have viruses such as influenza, you have COVID-19, you have fungi, which leads to athlete's foot, you have protozoa, which leads to schistosomiasis, you have macroparasites. This is also a type of organism that is lice and ticks. Each of these organisms, they have different characteristics, and this makes them unique and well designed to cause disease. So they're all equipped with their killing power. Okay, so different organisms have different killing power, or the power to cause an infection and damage to the body. So bacteria are found almost everywhere, including in and on the human body. So I said the skin also has bacteria that are not harmful. They're there. So the skin actually itself is a protective organ. The skin itself protects our body against so many organisms. But then the skin also has certain bacteria that are harmless. And when our immunity reduces, these harmless bacteria, they are reduced, obviously, and then there are harmful bacteria that overcome. And then most bacteria live in close contact with us and our environment. They don't cause harm, but then some bacteria can infect the body and cause disease. Examples are bacterial diseases like streptococcal sore throat, pertussis, which causes whooping cough, especially in children, and meningococcal diseases. So all of these organisms, if you can think of it, you if what do we do, how do we protect ourselves? Obviously there's protection within the body, but if that protection isn't enough, you would want to get artificial protection, and that is obviously through vaccines. So what's about a bit about the structure of an organism which enables it to function as a pathogen? So an organism is different. Okay, so any organism like bacteria is an organism, but is it a pathogen? So a pathogen is something that causes a disease. An organism, you have organisms everywhere around your body. So as I said, there are harmless organisms which are not pathogens. A pathogen is named so because it causes pathology. Pathology is disease within your body. Okay, so bacteria, they are described by their shape when you look under a microscope, and whether they exist alone or attached to each other. So they might be colonies that they're attached to. They might have clumps of bacteria. So they might not be just one. There's several bacteria that work together against the human body. So there, within the bacteria, you have rod-shaped bacteria such as bacilli, and the example is E. coli. So they are exactly rod-shaped bacteria. They're spherical, such as Staphylococcus. They're curved or spirochetes, such as Vibrio cholera. They can also be termed as gram-positive or gram-negative. That depends upon whether or not they can be stained when looked under the microscope. So gram-positive is something that can be stained. So you put a staining. So why do we use stains? We may use stains to see which bacteria it is actually. So we want to visualize it under the microscope. So if those that are not that cannot take up that stain or that color, that is called as gram negative. Otherwise they are gram positive. Okay, and then there are different shapes of these bacteria. Why do we need to know? Because this is to identify which organism, because they don't come with names obviously, but they have come up with shapes. So if we have a particular rod shaped bacteria and we have a patient who's suffering from it, we know which antibiotics to give to that person. Okay, so there are many times that people come with infections and they want an antibiotic, but then because practitioners know that it's a viral infection that is spread out, that is contagious, and it's not an antibiotic. So you need to give antibiotics with real caution. Okay, so viruses are there mostly, they don't need medication, not antibacterials at all, because there is no bacteria there. And structure of an organism that enables it to function as a pathogen. Bacteria, so bacteria that are they are single celled, so they are known as prokaryotes. So they have a single cell, they're made up of a single cell, and whichever microorganism causes a disease, their main function is to find a host and then to reproduce themselves. Who is a host? So a host can be a human, okay? And you host that organism, whether you like it or not. You're home to that organism, okay? That organism lives there, it reproduces itself, and it comes as a single celled organism, but then it reproduces itself and it needs you as a host. If you provide those opportunities, if you're not good in your diet, you're not sleeping well, you're not eating well, you're not exercising well, you become a very good host to that organism. Um, Hosts can be other types also. So you can have a host such as a dog for rabies. So rabies virus will not infect you unless you've been bitten by, or you've got some wound that is deep enough, and then that dog's saliva, or its on secretions from its mouth, if that has that virus in itself, the rabies virus, if that gets in touch with your immune system, it can cause rabies to you. But in this case, the human is not the host. So the host, it has to be someone or something that helps the organism multiply or grow in intensity. So obviously, as I said, there's some organisms that can grow within you. So you are the host, but there's certain organisms that cannot grow within you. So in this case, in case of rabies, the host where the multiplication actually happens is the dog primarily. Bacteria are uniquely designed to withstand an attack from the host's immune system. Okay, so your immune system is there, but then the bacteria is so strong. So that is why you need to take antibiotics. If those don't work, obviously, antibiotics are something that you take after you've developed an infection. But then to protect yourself from that infection, you have vaccines available. Okay. So, how's the structure of a bacteria? Um, there are a number of features that of the cell which make it difficult for the host immune defenses to kill. So, there's a cell wall around the bacteria. Okay. And this is impervious, or it can the immune system of the person cannot. Sorry. Yeah, so the cell wall, it's so hard that your immune system, your host immune system, cannot penetrate it. It cannot kill it. So that is how the cell wall is. The cell wall of the bacteria is um, made up. And then you have a cell capsule around the bacteria. This is the capsule around the bacteria. This again protects the cell from extreme environments. Okay, so you might want to kill a bacteria. For instance, if you're boiling water, you want to kill certain bacteria, but then there's a capsule around the bacteria that protects it from being killed. There are pili that are hair-like organisms. Okay, so these pili are they help in attachment to the body of the organism, of the human being. Okay, so you are the host, these pili or these hair-like organisms help the bacteria to get attached to your body. Sorry. Then there's a plasmid that contains supplementary or additional genetic material. So this chromosomal DNA. So the bacteria has a DNA, it has ribosomes, it has structures that help it to um, develop and to multiply and to gain resistance to antibiotics, toxin production, and how to tolerate toxic environments. And there are fimbriae, these hair-like organisms. They help the bacteria to stick to the host cells and can produce a biofilm, which is a thin sheet of cells on a liquid surface, makes the host defense more difficult. Okay, so these fimbria are there to further attach to the human being. Okay. Talking about viruses, I think I will do the structure and then in tomorrow we'll do further what's left behind. Okay. So sorry. So viruses, their number of diseases. So they have a virus has a DNA. Okay. The outside the host cell, the virus can survive by existing as a protein coat or a capsid. So there's a capsid around the virus. This capsid, it carries the DNA of the virus. Okay. So if obviously an organism that can divide has to have a DNA. The virus becomes active when it comes into contact with the host cell. Okay, so it remains dead when it's outside the host cell. It needs a host cell to become alive. And then it inserts its own DNA into the host cell DNA and hijacks the cell to produce more viral DNA. So this is how it attacks. So the viral DNA will then continue replicating until it bursts out of the cell, a host cell, killing the cell and infecting other cells as well. Okay, so in for instance, in HIV, you have common cold, you have chicken pox, influenza, herpes, you have polio, rabies, Ebola, AIDS, you have coronavirus as well. So there are different structures within this organism. We'll see HIV. So it has an inner core of RNA, ribosome nucleic acid, and it has attachment proteins, sorry, that attach to the host, which is you. All these organisms within this virus, they help in dividing and replicating. There's an envelope outside this virus which makes it impenetrable to attacks by you. For instance, it's immune to certain drugs. So it hijacks your own cells and incorporates its DNA into your cell DNA, and then it replicates and then bursts, and then that's how it reproduces itself. So coronavirus, it's this is a typical example of coronavirus. It has a viral DNA, it has ribosomes, it has DNA, it has a new that's caused by a newly discovered coronavirus infection, coronavirus, sorry. So the organism is coronavirus. Most people that are infected with COVID-19 virus, they'll experience mild to moderate respiratory illness and recover without requiring special treatment. As I said, viruses don't require treatment. Okay, antivirals will not, there are no antivirals. The only thing that it can help is the symptoms. So you might develop a fever. So for fever you will have to have an antipyretic or some drug that reduces your fever. So in healthy people, it doesn't cause much of a problem. People who have intact immune systems, but people who are old and they have underlying medical conditions, so they have conditions that make them prone to develop these certain diseases, such as a coronavirus infection. So their immune system is already low. So they may have diseases of the heart, they may have diseases of the like diabetes, chronic respiratory disease already, they have cancers. Pregnant women, for instance, they're all more prone to develop infections. So, what's the best way to prevent and slow down transmission? It's being informed well about how COVID-19 happens, how it spreads, what's the virus, how protective is it, and protect yourself and others from infection by washing your hands and using an alcohol based rub frequently and not touching your face. So, those have been helpful. This virus spreads primarily through droplets of saliva or discharge from the nose when an infected person coughs or sneezes. So, it's important that you wear protective equipment. So, you or you cough into a flexed elbow. This is through the World Health Organization. Um, and obviously, face masks have been helpful, but they're not 100% protective. So you need to use these protective measures. I'll just go through fungi and protozoa. I might not do protozoa at the moment. I might just do fungi, and then we'll call it a day for today. So Fungi are a group of organisms, microorganisms again, that you see under the microscope. And these include yeasts, their molds, and mushrooms. They prefer to live in damp. So fungus, you'll see molds living in the UK. You won't find mold living in other places of the world where there's not much moisture. Okay, there are many fungi that are edible. So, such as mushrooms, there's baker's yeast. They're not dangerous, but some can cause disease. So, there might be poisonous mushrooms that can kill. You might ingest them not knowing. Examples of fungal diseases are Tinea corporis, ringworm, Tinea pedis, which causes athlete's foot, and Candida, which causes thrush. These diseases can cause minor infections such as athlete's foot, or more serious systematic diseases which affect the whole body, and they can be life threatening as well, such as aspergillosis. um, so fungus will enter your body through a wound, or you might inhale their spores. Fungus are eukaryotes, means they have only one cell, and they no, sorry, fungus has many cells. So prokaryotes are those that have only one cell. Sorry, I'm going back. So bacteria are prokaryotes. They have single cells. They're only one-celled organisms, but eukaryotes are like human beings. Okay, so fungi are like are human, is similar to human beings, their cells. The exact mechanism of pathogenesis is not well understood as yet. So that this is a trichophyton fungus which causes ringworm on the scalp. So you have it has Golgi apparatus, which is the DNA. It has a plasma membrane. It has a cell wall to protect itself. Mitochondria, which again gives its energy. It has a nucleus. It has multiple nuclei. So we as organisms and human beings have multiple nuclei as well. That is why we are similar to fungi. So I'm not proceeding from here. I'm stopping sharing my slides. Any questions? I know it has been a lot that I have taught you already. So what we'll do tomorrow, 10 o'clock, again, we will meet tomorrow. The link has been shared with you. Uh, we will you will help me revise all of what we've done already. Okay, so I hope you've taken notes, but if you haven't, the recordings are available every Monday on your Moodle page. Okay, so you'll have the recordings on Monday, but obviously you've gone through the session with me. I'll stop recording here.